By the way, folks, just in case you're curious, no, Russia did not help me. Okay? Russia. I call it the Russian hoax.
How closely do you follow the news on Russia, Mueller investigation? Are you sitting there going?
Well, no, I follow it. I follow it really closely because I consider it a real threat to our democracy. And like a lot of threats, it has sort of insidiously approached us, and I can again agree with you that there are a lot of people who are saying, well, you know, what did they do and how did they do? What does this mean?
It can be hard to track as a story.
It's hard to track.
It's hard to tell as a story.
Yes, and so I'm waiting. I mean, I think that you know, when these investigations hopefully give us some real information, I'd like to see more public hearings. I'd like to see more people have to answer questions about what they knew and what they did. But at some point, we will see the pieces begin to fit together. And I want to make this point really, because it's very important. Let's say that your original question to me that, okay, so the Trump campaign's on this track and the Russians are on this track, and they don't converge, right, but they mutually reinforce each other. Okay, fine. So there's no criminal conduct, there's nothing that would lead to any kind of indictment. But we know they interfered. So despite the fact that we may never really believe or accept that there was cooperation, right, or criminal,
or establish that.
Yeah, establish that. The fact that they did this to us, and the fact that they were trying to do it to the French, and the French because of my defeat, and the Dutch because of my defeat, and the Germans because of my defeat, were much better equipped to push it back and prevent it from influencing their voters. I think that should be a rallying cry for anybody, Republican, Democrat, or whoever.
There's a story today that when I read it, my first thought was, oh, I want to see what Hillary Clinton said about this, which is a story about Jared Kushner
yes,
using personal emails in the White House. Of course, there's certain irony.
I must have gotten 100 copies of that.
Did people text and email you
yes,
that story?
Yes.
What's your reaction to it?
Well, the first thing I would say is, look, if people still have questions about my emails, I hope they'll read the book and read the whole chapter, because every question that was asked, we answer, okay? And I've been the first to say, and we'll say again right here on your show, it was a dumb mistake, but it was a dumber scandal. And it was promoted by and really turned into a partisan weapon against me, along with the tragedy of Benghazi. And I think that the other side was quite successful in sort of ginning that up and getting people to believe things that were just flatly not true. So now we have this story about Kushner and apparently others in the White House, and I am waiting to see the outrage on the part of Republican members of Congress about this. And you will not see it.
Here's a question for you.
You will not
Was
find
it all? I actually have this question for you.
Yeah.
Do you think people like Jason Chaffetz and others who were these sort of inquisitors of yours, do you think it was fully bad faith? Which is to say, if they took a truth serum, they would be like, yeah, there's not much here? Or do you think they convinced themselves that they were on the track with this email, for instance, of some huge scandal?
I think the leaders, it was totally bad faith.
You really do?
I absolutely do. I mean, I have Kevin McCarthy, you know, quoted in my book saying, gee, her numbers were so high. You know, I come out of the State Department with 69%
right,
approval, and we brought her down. You know, we set out to bring her down, and we brought her down. And you know, I take responsibility for not figuring out how better to respond. I testified for 11 hours in the Benghazi committee, and that's really where all the email action was. They threw everything they had at me, and I walked away unscathed, but they never let it go, and they unfortunately, you know, again, convinced a lot of people that there was something there that they had to find.
I have a theory about this. No, I have a theory about this, and I really want to hear what you think. So I think that part of what that did was demonstrate to people that if you elect this woman president, it's going to just be an absolute quagmire disaster. Meaning, sure, Hillary Clinton's president, and day one is Benghazi hearing, email hearing. And I know a lot of people that voted for you whose anticipation of a Clinton presidency wasn't getting stuff done on opioids. It was just basically holding the line against this insane inquisition.
Yeah, but you know what? I want to respond to that because I've heard that and I've seen that batted back and forth and you know.
And I think it helped Trump. I really do, because I think
the Comey letter helped Trump because that did raise in the minds of voters the fear that, oh my gosh, if I vote for her, you know, what, she might go to jail. I mean, that I think that was a very real connection. And again, I don't blame voters. What were they to think? But on the broader question, you know, you stop and you think about how this election, you know, played out and who was on what side and what they were saying. When I'm in office, people work with me. I write that in the book. You know, before I got to the Senate, I get elected in 2000 here in New York, and Trent Lott, then the Senate Majority Leader, says, oh, well, maybe lightning will strike and she'll never show up. And by the end of my time there, he was saying, wow, you know, you can really work with her and all the rest of it. So the reality of who I am and what I can do and how I can get things done, it's one of the reasons why President Obama supported me so strongly, because he saw me in action. So I knew all that noise would be out there, and I knew they would be, you know, baying at the moon, as they often do, but I had every confidence that I could contain it.
Which is in the book and is really a striking part of the book, because basically I think it's like a very honest, I mean, it seems as honest. I don't know. Maybe it's totally deceptive, but it reads as honest.
I did my best.
It reads as a very honest. No, it reads as a very honest articulation of how you understand governing and a theory of change, which is like you get stakeholders together and you find areas of common agreement. You take problems the country has, whether that's opioids, whatever, and there are ways to get people to get over, you know, your scary Hillary Clinton. And it's convincing to a certain extent in the book. But then I watch what's happening in the Senate, and I think to myself, that seems divorced from the reality of the nihilistic struggle that is American politics at this moment.
But let's take the health care.
Right, because it's a perfect example.
Right, okay, so assume I were in the White House. None of this would be going on. That doesn't mean the Republicans would be lining up, but we would support a bipartisan process, such as was occurring in what's called the HELP Committee with Senators Alexander and Murray. Working to find some common ground on some of the concerns that both parties legitimately have, not the crazy stuff that we're seeing right now. So that wouldn't be going on. Now, can I sit here and say, oh boy, you know, we would have solved all the problems of affordable care? No, but I can tell you, we would have every single day had smart, effective people in the Congress and outside working, and I would have known everything that was going on, so that my intervention, which I would have done, that's the way a democracy is supposed to work. I mean, part of what is so troubling to me about what's happening right now are these ideological claims, these powerful interests on the outside who are forcing members of Congress on the Republican side to do things that, with a straight face, they can't defend. They can't even explain. You've had some of these people. You ask them, well, so what does this, you know, Graham Cassidy thing do? They have no idea. And you have one senior member of the Senate saying, well, you know, I don't think it's a very good idea, but we said we would do it. How absurd. So the president has to be a kind of referee as well as a, you know, a convener. And it goes day by day by day to get things done that are actually going to help people.
Do you think the president has any idea what's in any of these bills?
No, I don't think he has any idea. I think that, you know, he has such a need to try to defeat President Obama, who he didn't even run against. So he's constantly, you know, attacking me or attacking former President Obama. And so the fact that it's the Affordable Care Act that was signed by President Obama that's enough. Right. He has no idea. And everything he has said up until now shows that he has no idea, because he contradicts himself endlessly. When the first version came to the floor and John McCain killed it along with Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, all of a sudden Trump is saying, well, we're going to get a better deal and it's not going to hurt anybody and it's going to be wonderful. He has no idea. But it almost doesn't matter to him, because he's just trying to, you know, keep the energy among his base on all these things. They don't have any idea either, and to keep the Republicans in line. That's his mission for this, you know, year.
All right, still to come, Hillary Clinton. Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.